Uh, Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'd like to firstly welcome our partners from Pimento and the Network One for this key briefing from the Advertising Association, who have been instrumental in supporting the industry, particularly facing up to government through this whole Covid-19 we're going to say crisis, but episode, let's call it an episode. Crisis for some, episode for others. And I've got to say, on behalf of the MAAG, as members of the Advertising Association, they have done a superb job and really been representing us in like no other way. So they are for those that you don't know about the Advertising Association, and Stephen might say a few words, they are really the place where all the trade organisations for the industry comes together. And so thank you, Stephen, for doing this seminar. And Stephen's being joined by Sue, who many of you will know, who's Director of Public Affairs at the Advertising Association. And I'm sure she can fill in on some of the detail if Stephen is not sure on any points. So really, from this area on, I just want to hand over to Stephen, who will give the briefing. And if you have any questions, please could you put them into the Q&A box, which you can find by bringing your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, and we'll address them when Stephen's finished. And in places we'll unmute you, other times we'll answer them straight from the screen. Okay, Stephen, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you very much for those warm words of welcome, and really appreciate the feedback on the work we're doing on behalf of the industry. I'll send a compliment back. Clive is a very active member on behalf of MAAG and has been involved in our weekly calls with across industry, but where we also have government departments on the line as well, so that we can be feeding back directly into the key ministries that matter for our industry, and those really are three. So there's DCMS, which is the lead government body, government department for the advertising industry, but also very important is BEIS, the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, and for those who are interested in exports, Department of International Trade. So those are the three departments we have most contact with on all your behalves, on behalf of the whole industry. And I think the first thing to say is how intensive the two-way conversation is going between government and industry. I think in all the things I've been involved with, both ad industry standing alone, or we're also part of two bigger cross-industry groups, the Creative Industries Council, which represents all the creative industries, and something called the Professional Business Services Council, which represents all Britain's professional services. Everybody across industry recognises the breadth and the speed and the scale of the government response, and applauds them for it, and applauds them for the continuous desire to get feedback. I've been on a regular weekly ministerial call with DCMS, and there's another one tomorrow with BEIS. So there's a lot of feedback going back and forth. So sessions like this are incredibly important. So I'm not going to talk for too long, because we want to hear what's troubling you, what you want to hear, what you want to say to government, and what you want to hear back from them in return. But I'll just give a quick overview of what we're doing. So there's that intensive two-way communication, not just to make sure that the policies are right, but actually now it's into the implementation of those policies. And Clive was very forthright on your behalf about the weaknesses in the business interruption loan scheme, CBILS as it's known colloquially, which actually on the news at lunchtime today, they were talking about potentially improvements to that. And the Ed Miliband from the Labour Party is asking for a Swiss-style scheme, so that 100% of the loans are underwritten by government, which will stop the banks, I think, trying to either cross-sell or slowing up the whole application process. So they're very aware that that needs to be speeded up, and we've been making that case very strongly. There's a whole load of other policy areas that we're involved with, but I think probably top of the list, if we look at the survey that we're doing, which some of you are taking part in, the furlough scheme, as it's colloquially known, is the number one scheme that companies in our industry are using. Number two is VAT deferral, and then it goes down into the other schemes that are, so it's things like they're looking for a lot of interest in the direct cash grants for self-employed. Then in fact, the CBIL scheme comes fourth on the list from our survey. Fifth comes tax deferral, and sixth, and a long way in last place is probably the scheme for larger companies, given most, the CCFF as it's called, not surprisingly, given most of our companies in our industry are SMEs. So furloughing is top of the list, and VAT deferral is number 2. But like all these things, the devil is in the details. So there's a huge amount of feedback coming back through us, both through our member trade bodies and directly through our survey and so on, that we're feeding back into government. So there's a lot of work now about the implementation of these schemes, and clearly, particularly with the CBIL scheme, that is a life support that businesses need now, not in weeks to come. Hopefully we'll see some moves forward from government. And I do think what we have seen is responsiveness. We've seen the Chancellor in particular respond to criticism and announce improvements in sort of record times for policymakers. So government response is extraordinary, but we are in an extraordinary time, and I would call it a crisis, because none of us have ever lived through anything like this, where the whole economy shuts down and goes to 60, whatever the number % is, of normal operating, and where so many businesses are simultaneously affected. If you think back to the financial crisis, that was slow motion. That unrolled over 18 months, and we went from a finance crisis into a general economic crisis. But this has just gone exploded, if you like, across the whole economy. The biggest issues we were feeding back, and in fact on a ministerial call I was on earlier on today, was actually we want some clarity about the extension of the furlough scheme. It's originally 3 months. That's up at the end of May. I don't think anybody thinks the lockdown will be anywhere lifted. It might be partially lifted by the end of May, but we're certainly going to need that to extend into June and potentially July. Otherwise, we'll have a sort of cliff edge of redundancies, I think, with all those people who are now in effect on the government payroll. Those firms are going to be so stretched in terms of cash flow, they're not going to be able to pick them back up again. So we're looking for clarity on that. We're also looking for clarity on what is the exit strategy. And I think it's interesting, this is not to make a political point, but to see how much more effective Keir Starmer is already as an opposition by pressing the government on what the exit strategy is. So we're very keen to see that, and we're very supportive of Labour's calls for clarity about what that exit strategy is, because actually it's the uncertainty that we see in our surveys the biggest worry that business has. Is they can almost tough it out for 3 months, even 6 months, a lot of firms, but it's the open-ended nature of that I think is causing so much problem. So uncertainty is the biggest challenge, although interestingly we saw in our survey, and we've seen this actually in the OBR report that came out yesterday, there is a sense at the moment that this is going to be a relatively short, sharp shock. A Q2 absolutely, down 45, 50%. Q3 very adversely affected, but potentially some sort of return to normality in Q4. So rather than, there's all sorts of talks about different shape recessions, W shapes, or do you remember Sorrell's bathtub shape when the financial crisis was on? There is a view that this is going to be a U-shaped hit to the economy, albeit we're likely to go into 2021 with much higher levels of unemployment and the sort of the shockwaves of this reverberating on. So it's even though the recovery might come quickly, and hopefully it does, the economic aftershocks of this I think will rumble on for potentially 1 or 2 years after. That being said, we are hopeful that we'll see similarly big government guns blasting away on the recovery, as well as actually preventing the worst of the impacts. The hope that we would see, and we will be lobbying for this, as are many others, is really big, bold measures to help the recovery, as well as help businesses through the crisis itself. So in the last crisis, there was a cut in VAT. Alistair Darling cut VAT from then at 17.5 down to 15. I think a big, bold cut in VAT to get the consumer going again, to get the economy going again, to get high streets open again, to get supply chains pulling through. Given the consumer is 80% of our economy in terms of the consumer markets are 80% of the economy. So we need to see that consumer impact in terms of spending. So that's what we hope to see. We're beginning to plan and think about what we might do in the recovery to help the recovery, because it will come at some point, but it will either be long and slow, or hopefully it'll be as strong as it possibly can be. And that's where industry and government working together, keeping this sort of unprecedented partnership going that we're seeing at the moment, I think is so important, and something that we will play our part, both on your part in respect of MAAG members, but also Clive alongside us in those meetings, making your voice heard. So please rest assured that your voice is being heard very, very loudly. The specific points that are affecting your businesses are being put to government. The good thing is, in a sense, is that you're part of a bigger army in the EAA, but also the sort of issues that you're talking about are issues that lots and lots of firms across the economy are talking about, particularly speeding up access to the loan scheme. I think, Clive, I know you want to be talking for 5 minutes or so. I've probably gone a little bit longer than that, but is that okay as a sort of introduction, and then we'll go to Q&A?
Really good. It's a really good start. The one thing which someone's already asked and is always on our checklist is property, and what's happening in relation to landlords, and has that been an area that's been specifically discussed?
It has been discussed, and business rates relief is a continual ask. We've got around specific sectors. As an example, for the outdoor industry, in effect, their business has been completely stopped by the shutdown, rather like other, and they're asking to be treated rather like leisure and tourism and so on, in the sense it's government edict for people to stay at home that in effect has limited their business. So we've been lobbying very hard for business rate relief on that. As yet, no response in terms of a positive, but not yet an absolute outright rejection. The point about empty offices and business rate relief is also something that we're continually lobbying on. At the moment, we're not getting necessarily encouraging noises back on that. I think just because the cost of that across the economy is so vast, and also the complexity because they're run through local authorities, I think Treasury are shy of. That said, I know businesses that are renegotiating and with their own landlords and looking, to strike their own deals, and I'm sure many of your members are doing those things to ensure that that it's obviously in the landlord's interest that those tenants stay in business and can be long-term tenants. So I would, in the absence of any business rate relief yet, I would be lobbying like mad against my landlord to see what deal I can do.
Okay. And then there's the other area which clearly covers our end of the market, which is a number of businesses are owner managed. Many of those owners are paying themselves through dividends, and therefore are not able to claim on either through furloughing or those people who are living off dividend from their income as opposed to PAYE income. Some people use that. Has that been addressed? Because there are large numbers
and that is a challenge that a lot of creative businesses across the creative sector are faced with, and there is a lot of work going on. In effect, as somebody described it on the call earlier today, to fill in the gaps between the schemes, between the furlough scheme and the freelance scheme. This is a really important gap, that affects a lot of Britain's entrepreneurs. That are the entrepreneurs of the future, and the people who will be creating jobs in the future, as well as ones that have already created those jobs. So it's vitally important that they don't fall through the gaps. So a lot of work going on that. What is very, very useful information to have, which always helps in these things, is we can do surveys and things like that, but it's real life stories that bring these things to life, where you can have a case history that demonstrates a particular, the particular business circumstance that we can bring these to life. So stories, case histories, very the more personal the better, actually, because they do really help us dramatise the story to government.
So really, the message is, if anyone on the call has any of those specific stories that want to brought to attention attention,
Yeah.
send them through to us, through to me or to Terry, and
Yeah.
we'll get them
Yeah.
through to Stephen.
Yeah, that would be great.
The Ad Association.
But so we are. I can't say when, but I think it's certainly an issue that is being pushed very, very hard. Is to ensure that there's no, in effect, there's nobody left behind by these schemes, because particularly if business owners suffer and the businesses fold as a result of that, then potentially the multiplier effect in terms of other jobs is obviously much more significant. So each one of those people probably has, I don't know, on average 10 or 20, 30 people dependent on them. So vital that they're supported as well.
I think one of the things which would be quite interesting to hear, because you see right across the industry, and also talking to ISBA and things like that, is how are brands seeing this in terms of their advertising spend and their relationships with agencies, and are they just seeing it as a way to kind of close things down, or are they pushing them? Is this the time when you kind of be talking to them and getting new work, or what's the feeling between big business agencies and brands and clients?
It's such so in a way the classic recessionary argument of those brands that spend through a recession come out quickest, come out strongest. So there's a ton of data going back 100 years that demonstrates that. And Mark Ritson in Marketing Week did a brilliant lecture on it about why you should keep spending through times like this. The trouble is, and this is not like a normal recession. And for many, many businesses, you'll have brands that, as an example, can't keep up with demand, so that they're pulling back on their marketing because they can't even supply the customers that they're getting. You'll have other brands for whom their market has just disappeared, has closed overnight, travel and leisure and tourism and so on. You'll have food brands and food retailers for whom, as I say, every week is like Christmas week at the moment. So again, massive amount of demand that they're struggling to keep pace with. As I'm sure many of you are now getting on first name terms with your delivery drivers. One of the DPD guy who comes to our house every day said it's now been Christmas for 3 weeks in terms of the intensity of their work. So you see these sort of highs and lows, and then obviously there are some people in the middle. One of the things that we've also picked up is that quite a few brands, or most brands, have recut their plans, whichever end of that spectrum they are. Business gone, business booming, probably the bulk in between. They are re-planning their activities, either to conserve cash because their own businesses are under huge pressure, or to reconfigure their marketing to be sensitive to the times. We're running a continual sort of update on great creativity that responds well to the crisis. So brands are looking to remake and reconfigure their planning so that they are seen to be respectful and responsive to the pressures around the crisis. So for very, very few, it's business as usual, and I think that has had a massive effect on. So I was talking to somebody from a large media agency last week, and she was saying that they were going absolutely flat out because all of their clients were replanning, pulling what they were doing, replanning it, relaying it down, deferring spend, whatever it happens to be. So a lot of agencies are going through that workload. So it's very difficult to give an overarching picture, and a simplistic view that we would, in normal circumstances, be talking about of, keep on spending through recession. Particularly media value is fantastic at the moment. Ratings have never been higher. Readerships have never been higher. Particularly, obviously apart from outdoor and cinema, radio listening is very high, etc. And because of the fall in demand, actually prices are really good too. So, if you could carry on spending, now's a fantastic time to do it. And there are plenty of brands that are doing that too. So it's very, very hard to generalize. But my very strong impression is brands are being incredibly thoughtful, responsive, responsible, and have a view to the long term through this. But obviously their first job is to protect their own businesses.
One question we've had asked is, clearly one of the people who's spending money at the moment, big time in all directions, is the government.
Yeah.
Do you think, and from our sector, the government contracts for agencies tend to go to the large groups. you think in order they might help stimulate by opening up the process to more SMEs in providing these services?
Well, as a veteran of the government roster, I mean, the process of getting on there is unbelievably bureaucratic, and I think the bulk of that spend will be going through their standby agencies, who basically, like Engine and Ogilvy, who are there to do these emergency communications campaigns. I personally think the government was slow on communications. They should have been doing much more around, social distancing much earlier. But I suppose, it's very easy to be critical because, we're not dealing with a crisis where on every single front you've got everything, signalling red. So they have been slow. I hope that out of it, I mean, it's an interesting point about the roster and how they come out of this. I'm an eternal optimist. I always think, even in bad times, good will come from this. And I do think things will change. And I think exactly that point about, if you like, opening up government spending to more entrepreneurial, owner-managed firms would be a very good way for government to use their economic clout to stimulate the growth of the economy. So I think all these things are up for grabs in the future. At the moment, I think they're just running as hard as they can to keep pace with the crisis. I think now the spend level is much higher, and we're all seeing a lot more communication. But this is one of the things I think through the recovery. I mean, we've thought about this process as in three. It's an acronym that a lot of people, or a phrase that a lot of people are using: survive, revive, and thrive. We're at the moment still in the survive phase. We're going to be moving hopefully into the revive phase, and that's what you'd hope to see. Government leading all the way through this, working hand in glove with industry. So when we get into this. So this would be my second call out to your members. Ideas around things that you can see in your businesses that would help through that revival stage. When the lockdown does start to ease and business starts to return, the high street starts to open up again, firms start to see some sort of return to more normal sales conditions. What can we do as an industry, both to help ourselves but to help the wider economy? We have to put ideas on the table that are not just self-serving, but serve the wider economy. And of course, that's what our industry does. This is the amazing position we're in. We serve pretty much every part of the economy. So we have, we have a very privileged position in that sense, but also potentially a very influential position. So ideas for revival are things that we're beginning to turn our mind to.
Okay. One thing which is very current at the moment, and I've heard a lot about and seen directly, is large companies behaving disgracefully in terms of their payment terms. It was bad before, but some of them are behaving even worse now when cash is king. Where they've probably got more than the smaller companies and they're looking to extend payment terms. Is that, we would have been having later on this month a debate in the House of Commons for the debating group around whether payment terms should be legislated. But it's really coming to the fore. Cash is king and large companies are holding back. Has this been discussed at all? Because when the large take advantage of the small, it's really bad, and a lot of the companies will go under because payment terms not being met.
Well, again, evidence of that would be very, very helpful. It has come up, but it's also come up that large firms have expedited payment, particularly to smaller firms and production companies and so on, because they recognise that those payments might be the last cash that they're going to be getting for some weeks or months. So again, it's a very mixed picture. I mean, personally, I that motion that you're proposing at the debating group, wouldn't it make life simpler if we all didn't try and act as each other's bankers, that we all paid each other on time? The whole economy moved to a 30-day strict payment terms would be very good. But that again, that's perhaps one of those ideas that we put into the revive stage. Let's not have, particularly if there's a recurrence of this or a secondary outbreak or whatever comes, if we're going to learn the lessons from this crisis, it would be that exactly that point you made, Clive. Cash is king, and if we start gluing up the cash flows of businesses and between businesses, we just make a bad situation worse.
Yeah. I have one question in terms of the return to work. There's been discussion of some companies being allowed back sooner than others, and it seems that there's discussion of one of the areas hit most hard, hospitality, restaurants, and like, will be the last on, because those are the areas that infection will likely spread again. Have you heard that?
To be honest, all we hear, we ask these questions on every single call, as you know, and we hear nothing back other than we hear you and we are working on this and we will be doing this as soon as we think, it is safe. So, the health versus wealth argument, government are trying to balance that unbelievably difficult equation, but they're prioritising, rightly so, health. But as soon as the trade-offs, these trade-offs could just get more and more extreme and more painful. So we know nothing more than what we read in the media, and we hear nothing back on this because it is so. I presume that they have got a huge amount of different scenarios depending on the trajectory of infection rates and death rates.
Yeah.
And whether it's a regional open up, the thing that feels most likely is that's schools, and maybe it'll be infants and juniors that go back first. That they'll start with schools and then they'll perhaps work through construction or whatever it happens to be. Industries where social distancing might be where they're economically vital, but also social distancing might be easier to maintain. The one thing I think we have all learned collectively, which I think is astonishing in a sense, is our industry, along with most others, all went home on the same day and all worked from home on the same day. And guess what? It largely worked. What amazing ingenuity and resilience, I think, not just we have shown, but the whole economy that has moved to that home working. Because if we all gone home and just said, well, we're just going to wait till we go back to our offices and nothing happened, the economy would be 80% down rather than 30 or 40% down.
Can you imagine if we didn't have Zooms and Skypes and all the rest of it?
How wonderful this technology is, but also how the broadband networks have largely stood up to it. So hats off to all those infrastructure providers who are probably working at double the normal volumes, and the Zooms and the Teams and the Hangouts and all the rest of it. But I think what we also think about, I'm sure we've learned it as our business, and I'm sure everybody on the call will feel the same, is you're going to look at everything about the way you work in a different way after this. You're going to look at your office space. You're going to, are we going to end up all reducing our, if you like, fixed costs in our offices and moving the ratio more towards our people and technology? That would be a good thing overall, I think. So, good things will come out of this in that sense too.
Are you beginning to get a sense as to how much of the industry has been furloughed? I was on a call earlier on this morning, and Savanta gave a presentation, and their figures seem to suggest that 18% of the working population is furloughed.
Well, we would love that data, because in fact we were talking this morning about setting up some sort of almost like a furlough forum, imagine, for all these people who are suddenly in this quite weird position where they're only allowed social contact with their firms, their work emails switched off and all sorts of things. Is we don't know. So I know Savanta on the call would welcome that data, because we're trying to get a fix on how many. We're hearing, we know it's the most interest, it's the measure that most firms in our industry are interested in, and it is a brilliant measure because think about what the alternative would have been. Horrific levels of redundancies, and then all the costs of rehiring people as and when a recovery comes. But it's been a superb scheme if it does sustain us through to the lockdown being lifted, and all of those people can come back into work, and pick up where they left off. I mean, we would feel it would be like to use a wartime metaphor, it would be the Dunkirk moment for employment, wouldn't it? Getting everybody out and back safely. Yeah.
Stephen Knights actually is on the call. He has actually sent you the Savanta data from the presentation from this morning. So that's been emailed to you as we speak.
Lovely. Thank you, Stephen.
And in fact, I'll I'll make a bit of a plug and maybe ask for your help as well. Yesterday, MAAG launched what we call Independence FC, furlough community, and we're calling on all our members and Pimento members and Network One members who have furloughed people to join a group, and we're running training course starting next week. I say training course, activities that they can participate in, but really to say to them, whilst your companies may have not involving you currently, your industry hasn't, and therefore there are things for everybody to come together and you can stay involved in the industry. So
and I think I think that's absolutely brilliant, and I think that we're very conscious of, and we were talking to NABS, which our industry charity, this morning about their call volumes, which not surprisingly are double the normal rate. Huge amount of inquiry about furloughing and the contractual status and all the other things like that. And keeping in mind how this feels to be furloughed, it's albeit it's being done for the right reasons, it must be a very tough feeling just to suddenly be sent home and always being told, well, we can manage without you.
Yeah, and in some cases they've had their emails cut off in order to.
Well, I think to follow, I think the if the strict interpretation of the rules is that you do need to cut off their emails. Yes. But you can, and not have any commercial contact with them. So again, actually, that's an important point around, the refinement around the edges and in some cases the principles of this. There was talk on the call earlier on with the DCMS Minister Caroline Dinenage about part-time furlough, because actually that would be, if you think about our business, it would really be helpful to say have somebody in a business for 2 days a week and then furloughed for 3 days a week, or vice versa, so that they still keep a rhythm going of their work, and that rather than the all or nothing of the current scheme. So that perhaps that will come, but it's certainly something that we and others have been pushing for.
Yeah. And also, what do you think will be the changes maybe? Everyone's subscribing to this thing, which is, there's going to be a new reality. Do you think that there'll be a new reality and then it all go back to normal? I remember in terms of the financial crisis, it was people's personal debt because debt was too high and the banks were giving out too much money, and therefore debt seemed to be a bad thing. And less than 10 years later, personal debt and household debt was higher than it was before. So do you think that we're seeing a lasting shift, or is this something that might be there and then 12 months' time, all back to normal? My feeling is there will be a lasting shift in the way we work, because we've all realised actually we can be, very, very productive and connected, and flexible working will just become so much more the norm. I think that will have an impact on workspaces and all those other things. I think it will have an impact on things like business travel, that we will, and these are positives. Think about the climate footprint and the carbon footprint impact of this crisis. We have a climate action group looking at these things, and hopefully when normal, when some sort of normality returns, we'll see an acceleration towards industry and society changing to address that challenge. We've taken our eye off two enormously challenging things ahead of us. One long term, obviously being climate, and the other being short term, one being Brexit. And I saw today, there's not going to be we're not going to be asking for an extension, which I personally think is extraordinary if the government have got the bandwidth to also negotiate the Brexit deal and find anybody at the other end to negotiate with. But these two things. Last year our work was dominated by Brexit and the slow motion car crash that was. Now we're out, in the transition, and government are saying we're still going to be leaving at the end of this year. Extraordinary if we can pull off a deal while all this is happening, but that's what they're saying at the moment. So that's another looming issue, obviously, for our industry and the economy. And then as the biggest long-term challenge, which puts even this into significance, is climate. And I do think that's one of the positives that's going to come out of this, is we're going to change the way we work for the better, I think, as a result of this. I do also think, and I think the great paradox is
you know, we've never been more separate, but never felt more connected. And I'm sure you're feeling with your, and I hope your members are feeling this. You know, we're certainly feeling it with our membership. We're all, this crisis has brought us all much closer together. We, you know, that shared sense of vulnerability and fragility and interconnectedness that we sort of take for granted, you know, in many ways. You know, that stuff turns up and we've got these incredibly complex supply chains and sophisticated industries. But this has made us realise how fragile all this is. You know, so whether we build more resilience in, whether as business owners we are much more cautious about building up our balance sheets and all these other things that, you know, that I know I would be, if I was running a business as opposed to a trade body, I would be thinking about in the future. So I do think there will be profound change.
Yeah. Well, one of the nice things about it, the reassuring things about all this is it's not my fault. My business is in a mess, but it's not. Yeah. It's nothing that I've done.
No, and a sense of we're all in it together. You know, it's affecting everybody equally. So yeah, so more questions.
Yeah. There's one just in terms of it's an area that MAG's covered a lot. We again within the next 4 weeks we would have been holding our Festival of Happiness, which is about mental health. We have a good relationship with NABS too. It was always an issue for our industry before all of this. And if the more collective stuff for it, I mean, even having, I don't know, with NABS as part of the Advertising Association in order that they can put more direct input to things like to all the groups would be good. It's a two-way street, might be looked at, but certainly when we do our Independence FC, mental health is going to be very high on the agenda for that. Have you seen any industry collectivity around?
No, I think, I mean, it's interesting. There was a lot of momentum behind mental health issues before this, and again, I think this is one of the things that's going to be accelerated by this. Is you know, our mental and physical health and well-being, and our sort of shared, I suppose, responsibility for that and collective responsibility for that. I think again is something. You know, again, I would hope, you know, being again trying, you know, not being trying to relentlessly cut half full about this, but I think the sort of our recognition now for, you know, the NHS was already, you know, held in very high esteem by the great British public. You know, it's now, you know, stratospherically high esteem and deservedly so. You know, so our view on public services, our view on taxes, our view on, you know, ensuring that the public and private sectors can work together more collaboratively. You know, all of these things, I think. I was an NHS Trust non-exec director for 3 years, so I know the inside of the NHS from that level very, very well. And I was talking to one of my old colleagues who said, we've done more in the last month than we've done in the previous, he said, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years to change the way we work. You know, so the crisis has made, you know, what could be a very sclerotic and bureaucratic organisation do amazing things. You know, I was hearing today about the Nightingale Hospital has only got 19 patients in it at the moment. But isn't it good to know that there's capacity for 4,000 should they need it?
Should they need it?
So, you know, extraordinary stuff like that.
So, can I just? Stephen's given us a really good overview. Is there anything that you want to add to, or is higher on your agenda and more specifically you would like to share?
Thank you very much, Clive. I think Stephen's really covered the ground very well, and what we'd love to hear are examples and case studies from the members, if they could come in now, because then we can hear them firsthand and help relay them to the government, because as you know, that's really effective. They love hearing case studies and you know, about any problems members have with business loans or property landlords and so on. I remember that came up on as one issue for your members, and I know obviously furloughing is a big issue as well, though that seems to be more around what you can do and what you can't do and best practice, as far as I can see the concerns of your members. But what are key messages that you want us to relay to government, as Stephen has said? It'd be really handy to have those as a result of this call, and particularly, as Stephen has highlighted, as we think about next steps to cheer ourselves all up, to understand, you know, what is going to help us out of into recovery. Give us some ideas, because we are going to be talking about that on next week's call, and starting to sort of think about the whole industry agenda and how we might collectively make an impact and suggest things to government. Okay,
thank you for that, and hopefully everyone on the call has taken that on, and all case studies. Sue was saying to me earlier about a comment that I made in the call last week, which a member had brought up, in fact 2 members had brought up, that Coutts specifically as being a bank that was not on the government loan scheme, and it's that kind of specificity that is very good and goes in well to the powers that be. So anybody's got any specific examples is all very good. Okay, I think we're going to start wrapping up. Stephen, I suppose one question for somebody who's been in the industry around as long as you have, and even in your current role, not just at the Advertising Association, but chairman at Liberty. If you were starting now, would you start within an independent business? Do you think that the changes are going on there, or do you think that the groups are showing a resilience that makes it an interesting place to be?
Well, I think it's, you know, I've spent most of my career in groups, albeit I've been chairman of some smaller agencies. So when I was a Pimento member, I was chairman of a PR firm called Lexis, and I know Savanta as well as in their original incarnation. And I'm chairman currently of Liberty, which is a Brixton-based youth-oriented agency, a purpose-driven business. And I think, you know, if I was starting again, my biggest regret is I've never done my own thing. So started my own business. I've always worked for other people and other firms. I think the groups, one of the things that I think will come through this, and I don't know whether anybody, if you subscribe to MediaTel, there was a very good CEO sort of roundtable on that this morning, where a lot of larger agency CEOs are talking about how they think it's going to change their business. But you know, the groups were already going through, or they have been going through, you know, profound change, you know, driven primarily by the sort of technology changes and the rise of digital over the last 10 years or more. But the acceleration that this will cause for really radical change, I think, again, will be profound. So I think we'll see. The groups are incredibly resilient businesses. They're very, very good at adapting and changing. But I think we'll see accelerated change from them. But also, I think what would be the key learnings you'd get out of this sort of crisis? Agility, being close to your clients, being able to turn on sixpence to change your plans and reconfigure your business. I think resilience in terms of financial resilience, having a strong balance sheet, and putting, if Clive, as you were saying, the response to the financial crisis was consumers were reversed to debt for some years. I think this is going to be one of the responses that we'll see in business to this crisis is that we'll be looking for to have deeper reserves in our respective businesses. All of which might mean that we're going to be much more cautious and conservative. But I do think on the other side, I think that the ingenuity and the technological capability of what we're able to do, I think will make us feel the sky's the limit. I think, and I think actually particularly thinking about, a lot of businesses I'm sure on the call will have international business, and I know Network One obviously connects people around the world. That global connectivity is going to be so important. One of the key discussions we're having with Department of International Trade is, how quickly can we open up Britain's brilliant creative industries and advertising industry in terms of exporting to get that back on the road again. We had a boom year on the latest data in 2018, up 15%, one of the fastest growing of all Britain's services exports. We have the strongest balance of payments surplus of any country in terms of advertising exports. We want to see that come back as quickly as we can. So supporting international trade as well. And we've got a lot going on that. If anybody's interested in something called the UK Advertising Exports Group, please get in touch with us on that if you're an export-oriented company. working in partnership with DIT. So all of these things, I think, I sort of feel, I don't know if we read about one of the things that Boris said when he came out of hospital, about how the world looks brighter and everything just looks better. Hopefully we're going to, when we come out of this, have a similar view that actually we realise that we can do, we can do so much more, and we can make the most of the technology and the ingenuity and the creativity in our industries to do even more good for both business and for our society.
Yeah. And just one final thing, a question I might have missed in relation to when you have these kind of conversations, it kind of goes in, but you mentioned about lockdown kind of going beyond May, you talked about further extension of furlough support. When those kind of points are made, and I know they have been made, what sort of rumblings do you get back as to know whether they're hitting the mark or not, as to whether there'll be any response, or do you have to wait for the briefing like the rest of us?
I think we generally have to wait for the briefings. I mean, there's certainly, when something's coming, from the Chancellor or something, the officials do say, look, this Friday you'll hear a big step forward on this. So, when the big changes are coming, they're telegraphed. It's hard to say. There's so much input going back to government on these things. They are listening and they're working as hard as is possible to meet this challenge. So it's not through want of trying, and it's not through want of effort or belief or desire to fix this as best they can. So I think in good faith, I think everything that we say is registered. Whether they can do something about it, is not always clear. But all we can do is keep hammering away at these points, and particularly when we're part of bigger groups where we can make it as part of the business services sector or the whole creative industries. Because these are big, you put creative industries and professional business services together, we're talking, I think, probably about 17-18% of the economy. So, it really helps when you're part of bigger battalions in these things.
Okay. All right. Unless anyone's got any more questions, I'd like to thank Stephen. I'd like to thank Sue very much indeed for a good insight into what is going on. And really, I hope it's kind of come through that the comments that you make to MAAG and to Pimento are being fed through to the Advertising Association. They are being fed through into the right departments, and they are having an effect. So when Stephen says, give us real life examples to give texture and colour to what's actually going on, it really does help. So if people continue to feed those things into any of us, we will make sure that they get fed through into the Advertising Association and the points are made.
And also, Clive, I'd say great examples of creativity and agility, if you like, where your members have helped clients solve the problems of the crisis. We want to celebrate the brilliant work that's being done across our industry to help businesses adapt and thrive and survive through this crisis. So we want to pick out the best as well and point out where the industry is doing good.
And again, if you go onto the MAAG page, we do have an area where we're asking people to put that work into us. And also, if Matt Bourne from the Advertising Association, he has a portal for that kind of work as well, because we want to celebrate the creativity that's going on. So we both, all the organisations are giving their members an opportunity to show that work off. And we in turn are putting it on oyster catchers as well, just to give it great awareness. All right, unless anyone's got any more.
Clive, just say, so on behalf of Sue and I, thank you very much for hosting this. Thank you all for listening. As I said, yes, the follow-up's always appreciated. And yes, and I'll just say from us, best of luck to everybody as getting through this, and hope to see you all on the other side.
Thank you very much indeed. And rest of you have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.